Welcome to another video from ultimatealgebra.com. In this video, we will be looking at solving quadratic equations. We will look at solving quadratic equations by factoring and then look at solving quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is the easiest for most students because it's straightforward. So make sure you check it out. Let's dive in. In simple terms, a quadratic equation is an equation in which the highest power of x is 2. So here, we can see that exponent 2 is the highest for all of these. Let's look at question 1. Solve for x in 8x squared minus 12x equals 0. This is the most basic form of quadratic equation. Here, all we are going to do is bring the greatest common factors outside the parenthesis and leave the uncommon factors inside the parenthesis. We start with the numbers. We find the greatest common factor of the 8 and 12. That's the biggest number that can divide both 8 and 12 without a remainder. That number is 4, so we bring it out. We divide the numbers by the greatest common factor. We divide the 8 by 4 to get 2. Then we divide the 12 by 4 to get 3. Next, we work on the x. For letters, the GCF is the letter with the smallest exponent. Here, we have x exponent 2 and x. We know that x is the same as x exponent 1. Since x exponent 1 is the smallest, we will bring it out. Once we bring it out, we can remove it from here, so this will have no x term. We then subtract the exponent 1 from this. X exponent 2 minus 1 is x exponent 1, which is simply x. Please master this kind of factoring because we'll need it for questions 7 and 8. Now for the solving part. The idea used here is that if you have any values multiplying and the answer is 0, then it means at least one of the value multiplying is 0. For this equation, we have 4x multiplying 2x minus 3. For this to be equal to 0, it means either 4x equals 0 or 2x minus 3 equals 0. We solve for x in both equations. Divide both sides by 4. The 4 will cancel out. 0 divided by 4 is 0, meaning x equals 0. For the 2x minus 3 equals 0, we first add 3 to both sides. The 3 will cancel out. 0 plus 3 is 3. Next, we divide by 2. The 2 will cancel out. 2 cannot divide 3 without a remainder. So you'll have x equals 3 over 2. So our answers are x equals 0 or x equals 3 over 2. Question 2. 3x squared plus 18x equals 0. Solve the quadratic equation by factoring. This is similar to what we just looked at. You can try it out first. We want to bring the GCF outside the parentheses and the uncommon things inside the parenthesis. For the 3 and 18, the biggest number that can divide both without a remainder is 3. We will bring it out. We'll then divide each of the numbers by the 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now for the x, we bring the x with the smallest exponent out. Here we have x exponent 2 and x exponent 1. The x exponent 1 is the smallest, so we bring it out. So there'll be no x term here. We can subtract exponent 1 from here. X exponent 2 minus 1 is x exponent 1, which is simply x. We also know that 1x is the same as x. Please master this kind of factoring because we will need it in questions 7 and 8. Now to solve, we can say either 3x equals 0 or x plus 6 equals 0. We solve for x in both equations. Divide both sides by 3. The 3 will cancel out. 0 divided by 3 is 0. So x equals 0. For the x plus 6 equals 0, we will subtract 6 from both sides. The 6 will cancel out. 0 minus 6 is negative 6. So x equals negative 6. So our answers are x equals 0 or x equals negative 6. Now let's look at solving quadratic equations using the difference of two squares. Question 3. x squared minus 36 equals 0. Find x. This is a difference of two squares question. In math, if you have, let's say, a squared minus b squared, then you can factor it as a plus b times a minus b. Please, the sign here must be minus. It cannot be plus or anything else for this to work. So for our question, our first work is to identify that 36 can be written as 6 squared. So we can replace the 36 with 6 squared. Now we can use the difference of two squares to factor it. We will have x plus 6 times x minus 6 equals 0. We said that for this equation to be equal to 0, it means either x plus 6 equals 0 or x minus 6 equals 0. We solve for x. Subtract 6 from both sides. The 6 will cancel out. 0 minus 6 equals negative 6. So x equals negative 6. We solve for x here. Add 6 to both sides. The 6 will cancel out. 0 plus 6 equals 6. So x equals 6. So our answers are x equals negative 6 or x equals 6. Question 4. 4x squared minus 49 equals 0. Solve for x. When I see a question like this, my first intuition is to check if it can be written as the difference of two squares. Here, 4 can be written as 2 squared, and 49 is 7 times 7, so it can be written as 7 squared. 2 squared x squared is the same as 2x squared. So we have 2x squared minus 7 squared equals 0. This is the difference of two squares. So we can write it as 2x plus 7 times 2x minus 7 equals 0. To solve this, we can equate each of them to 0. 2x plus 7 equals 0, or 2x minus 7 equals 0. We subtract 7 from both sides. This will give us 2x equals negative 7. Then we'll divide both sides by 2. So we'll have x equals negative 7 over 2. We do the same here. We add 7 to both sides. This will give us 2x equals 7. Then we will divide both sides by 2. So we will have x equals 7 over 2. Therefore, our answers are x equals negative 7 over 2 or x equals 7 over 2. Question 5. Solve the equation x squared plus 14x plus 45 equals 0. In this question, we have a trinomial. There is no number in front of the x squared. In math, we say that the coefficient of the x squared is 1. When you have a case like this, you'll find two numbers that multiplies to get the constant 45. That same two numbers must also add to get the coefficient of the x, which is 14. This requires trial and error, and it's dependent on how good your multiplication is. The two numbers will be 5 and 9. 5 times 9 equals 45, and 5 plus 9 is 14. For this kind of questions, the x values will just be opposite the values you got. So here, x equals negative 5 or x equals negative 9. Since you got positive 5 and positive 9, this is really a shortcut way. If you're interested in detailed explanation, please let us know and we'll post a video on that. Let's take another example. Question 6. X squared minus 5x equals 14. Solve for x. This is similar to the previous question. It is important you make sure that all the values are on one side of the equation and 0 is on the other side before you solve any of the equations. Here, we have to move the 14. We can do that by subtracting 14 from both sides. 14 minus 14 is 0. So we have x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. We can see we have a trinomial with no number in front of the x squared. We find two numbers that multiplies to get the constant negative 14. Those two numbers must also add to get the coefficient of the x, which is negative 5. The two numbers are negative 7 and positive 2. Negative 7 times 2 will be negative 14. Negative 7 plus 2 will be negative 5. We said in the previous question that, for this kind of questions, the x values will just be opposite the values you got. So here, x equals positive 7 or x equals negative 2. Since you got negative 7 and positive 2. Now let's look at what you'll do when you have a number in front of the x squared. Question 7. 2x squared minus 3x minus 5 equals 0. Find x. This is also another form of trinomial. The difference is that the coefficient of the x squared is not 1. Or simply put, this kind has a number in front of the x squared. Here, that number is 2. When you get a case like this, the first step is to multiply the 2 and the constant minus 5. This will give us negative 10. Step 2. You'll find two numbers that multiplies to get the negative 10 and adds to get the minus 3. The two numbers are negative 5 and positive 2. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. Negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3. Step 3. Replace this minus 3x with the two values. So we have 2x squared plus 2x minus 5x minus 5 equals 0. Notice we haven't changed the equation. Plus 2x minus 5x is the same as minus 3x. Step 4. We group two terms each and factor the common terms in each group. For the first two terms, 2x is common to both, so we can factor 2x out. What will be left will be x plus 1. For the second part, we can factor negative 5 out. What will be left is x plus 1. What is in the parenthesis will always be the same for both groups. If you get different values, you're doing something wrong. Step 5. Bring what is in the parenthesis, x plus 1, times what is outside, that's 2x minus 5, equals 0. Step 6. Equate each of the things multiplying to 0 and solve for x. So we have x plus 1 equals 0. We solve for x to get x equals negative 1. Then we have 2x minus 5 equals 0. We solve for x to get 5 over 2. If you need more help on step 6, please watch our video on solving one-step and two-step equations. So our final answer is x equals negative 1 or x equals 5 over 2. The solution to this trinomial equation has a lot of steps. It requires a lot of practice. In a test, the best way to solve this kind is using the quadratic formula. We will look at that later on in this video. Okay, let's take one more example. Question 8. 5x squared plus 9x plus 4 equals 0. Find x. Here again, the first step is to multiply the 5 and the constant 4. This will give us 20. Step 2. You'll find two numbers that multiplies to get the 20 and adds to get the 9. The two numbers are 5 and 4. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 plus 4 is 9. Step 3. Replace this 9x with the two values. So we have 5x squared plus 5x plus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Notice we haven't changed the equation. Plus 5x plus 4x is the same as plus 9x. Step 4. We group two terms each and factor the common terms in each group. For the first two terms, 5x is common to both, so we can factor 5x out. What will be left will be x plus 1. For the second part, we can factor 4 out. What will be left is x plus 1. What is in the parenthesis will always be the same for both groups. If you get different values, you're doing something wrong. Step 5. Bring what is in the parenthesis, x plus 1, times what is outside, that's 5x plus 4, equals 0. Step 6. Equate each of the things multiplying to 0 and solve for x. So we have x plus 1 equals 0. We solve for x to get x equals negative 1. Then we have 5x plus 4 equals 0. We solve for x to get negative 4 over 5. So our final answer is x equals -1 or x equals -4 over 5. We will be looking at solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Let's take a question. Question 1. Solve the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 3x minus 5 equals 0. We will be using the quadratic formula. This is the best method of solving most quadratic equations. All you need to know here is how to use the formula. First, make sure your equation is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That means everything is on one side of the equation and 0 is on the other side. This is already in that form. In this form, the coefficient of the x squared, or the number with the x squared, is your a value. Here, the a value is 2. The b is the coefficient of the x, or the number with the x. So here, the b is -3. Please note that the minus is the sign of the number following it. That's why we have -3. Then c is the constant. Here, the c value is -5. Again, the minus is the sign of the 5. That's why we have -5. Now we put these values in our formula. The quadratic formula is x equals minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We'll just replace each of the letters by their values. Please take note of the color code so you know where everything is coming from. We have x equals minus -3 plus or minus square root of -3 squared minus 4 times 2 times -5 all over 2 times 2. We work out what is under the root sign first. -3 squared is -3 times -3, which is 9. Minus 4 times 2 times -5 will be positive 40. So we add 9 plus 40 to get 49. We can then find the square root of the 49. Finding the square root gives us 7. We know that minus negative gives positive. So the minus -3 is simply positive 3. Also, the 2 times 2 in the denominator will be 4. So we now have x equals 3 plus or minus 7 all over 4. Notice, we have plus or minus. We can solve the plus part first. We have x equals 3 plus 7 over 4. 3 plus 7 is 10. This is 10 divided by 4. We can reduce this to get x equals 5 over 2. Next, we solve the minus part. We have x equals 3 minus 7 over 4. 3 minus 7 is -4. This is -4 divided by 4. This will give us x equals -1. So our answer is x equals 5 over 2 or x equals -1. Please, in solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, the most important thing is being extra cautious. There are a lot of operations involved. Students usually get questions wrong only because they made some basic mistake like not adding well or forgetting to divide. Let's take our next question. Question 2. Solve the quadratic equation 2x squared plus 7x equals -6. We will be using the quadratic formula. First, make sure your equation is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That means everything is on one side of the equation and 0 is on the other side. This is not in that form. We have to move the -6. Because it is negative, we can move it across the equal sign to become positive. So we will have 2x squared plus 7x plus 6 equals 0. Now it's in the form that we want. In this form, the coefficient of the x squared, or the number with the x squared, is your a value. Here, the a value is 2. The b is the coefficient of the x, or the number with the x. So here, the b is 7. Then c is the constant. Here, the c value is 6. Now we put these values in our formula. The quadratic formula is x equals minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. We'll just replace each of the letters by their values. Please take note of the color code so you know where everything is coming from. We have x equals minus 7 plus or minus square root of 7 squared minus 4 times 2 times 6, all over 2 times 2. We work out what is under the root sign first. 7 squared is 7 times 7, which is 49. Minus 4 times 2 times 6 will be negative 48. So we add 49 minus 48 to get 1. We can then find the square root of the 1. Square root of 1 is 1. This part is simply negative 7. The 2 times 2 in the denominator will be 4. So we now have x equals negative 7 plus or minus 1, all over 4. Notice we have plus or minus. We can solve the plus part first. We have x equals negative 7 plus 1 over 4. Negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6. This is negative 6 divided by 4. We can reduce this to get x equals negative 3 over 2. Next, we solve the minus part. We have x equals negative 7 minus 1 over 4. Negative 7 minus 1 is negative 8. This is negative 8 divided by 4. This will give us x equals negative 2. So our answer is x equals negative 3 over 2, or x equals negative 2. Let's take our next question. Question 3. Solve the quadratic equation 5x squared plus 10x equals x minus 4. We will be using the quadratic formula. First, make sure your equation is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That means everything is on one side of the equation and 0 is on the other side. This is not in that form. We have to move the x and minus 4. Since the x is positive, we'll move it across the equal sign to become minus x. Since we have minus 4, we will move it across the equal sign to have positive 4. We are not done. We can add like terms. 10x minus x will be 9x. So we will have 5x squared plus 9x plus 4 equals 0. Now it's in the form that we want. In this form, the coefficient of the x squared, or the number with the x squared, is your a value. Here, the a value is 5. The b is the coefficient of the x, or the number with the x. So here, the b is 9. Then c is the constant. Here, the c value is 4. Now we put these values in our formula. The quadratic formula is x equals minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. We'll just replace each of the letters by their values. Please take note of the color code so you know where everything is coming from. We have x equals minus 9 plus or minus square root of 9 squared minus 4 times 5 times 4, all over 2 times 5. We work out what is under the root sign first. 9 squared is 9 times 9, which is 81. Minus 4 times 5 times 4 will be 80. So we add 81 minus 80 to get 1. We can then find the square root of the 1. Square root of 1 is 1. This part is simply negative 9. The 2 times 5 in the denominator will be 10. So we now have x equals negative 9 plus or minus 1, all over 10. Notice we have plus or minus. We can solve the plus part first. We have x equals negative 9 plus 1 over 10. Negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. This is negative 8 divided by 10. We can reduce this to get x equals negative 4 over 5. Next, we solve the minus part. We have x equals negative 9 minus 1 over 10. Negative 9 minus 1 is negative 10. This is negative 10 divided by 10. This will give us x equals negative 1. So our answer is x equals negative 4 over 5, or x equals negative 1. Let's take our next question. Question 4. Solve the quadratic equation 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. We will be using the quadratic formula. Please note that the quadratic formula will not be the easiest way to solve a question like this, but let's look at it. Then we will look at a better way to solve it. As usual, we will make sure our equation is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. What we see is that this doesn't have an x term. We can represent it by 0 and still use the quadratic formula to solve it. So we will have 4x squared plus 0x minus 9 equals 0. Now it's in the form that we want. In this form, the coefficient of the x squared, or the number with the x squared, is your a value. Here, the a value is 4. The b is the coefficient of the x, or the number with the x. So here, the b is 0. Then c is the constant. Here, the c value is negative 9. Now we put these values in our formula. The quadratic formula is x equals minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We'll just replace each of the letters by their values. Please take note of the color code so you know where everything is coming from. We have x equals minus 0 plus or minus square root of 0 squared minus 4 times negative 9 all over 2 times 4. Minus 0 is 0, and 0 squared is also 0. So we can simply write this as x equals plus or minus square root of minus 4 times negative 9 all over 2 times 4. We work out what is under the root sign first. Minus 4 times 4 times negative 9 is 144. We find the square root of 144. Square root of 144 is 12. The 2 times 4 in the denominator will be 8. So we now have x equals plus or minus 12 over 8. We can reduce the 12 over 8 to get x equals plus or minus 3 over 2. So x will be 3 over 2, or x will be negative 3 over 2. Question 5. Solve the quadratic equation 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. This is basically question 4, but we are solving it in a better way. We solve it with the same idea we used to solve linear equations. This time we want the x to be by itself. We will move the negative 9 across the equal sign. Since it was negative, it becomes positive. So we have 4x squared equals 9. Next, we'll divide both sides by 4. This 4 will cancel out. Now to get the x by itself, we have to find the square root of both sides. When you find the square root, you have to introduce plus or minus. This is because for every squared number, there are 2 ways to get it: the positive and negative. Example, let's consider 36. Negative 6 times negative 6 will give 36. Also 6 times 6 will give 36. So we can now find the square root. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 4 is 2. So we have x equals plus or minus 3 over 2. So we can say x equals 3 over 2, or x equals negative 3 over 2.
Thanks for watching. Encourage us to post more videos by liking and sharing. Also visit ultimatealgebra.com for more exclusive videos and get our course that will help you build a strong math foundation and pass your next test easily.